Good afternoon and most welcome to H804. Today we're going to make it a little bit more jolly. I don't know if you've seen the movie or read the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. I can indeed recommend it. It's written by the past Douglas Adams. It's extraordinarily funny. It's about the chap sitting in a bar having a couple of beers when he all of a sudden realizes his house is going to be turned down by bulldozers because in the municipality office there is a decision taken 5 years earlier that a road should be constructed over his house. Any objections had to be filed within 3 years. For some reason he missed this decision and therefore didn't oppose the whole thing, and he became very depressed and started to drink. When sitting in the bar he meets another person who's also drinking, and the other person says, "You shouldn't be depressed." "Why is that?" "Well, I'm going to let you into a little secret. There was a decision taken 1,000 years ago on Alpha Centauri that an intergalactic highway was supposed to be constructed right where Earth is. And you had the opportunity to object to that decision within 800 years. But since that objection was never made, later today the construction of the intergalactic highway is going to initiate." And all of a sudden he was zoomed up into the universe, and there began the adventures of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. Douglas Adams plays with a lot of concepts from quantum mechanics. He seemed to have an intuitive understanding what it is. And that is because of his schooling. He had friends who studied quantum mechanics, and he overheard them, and then he read something as well. And he constructed different things. He had a restaurant at the end of the universe, and that was the not only local end of the world, was also the temporal end of the world. The big crunch, so to speak. And there was supposed to be a restaurant you can visit, and you can actually see the end of the world from the restaurant having a nice drink. One thing that Douglas Adams didn't know about and didn't put into his book, that was a concept from quantum mechanics called retrocausality. And could have been that the book would have been too funny with retrocausality, or the whole big book would be unreadable because it would be too hard to find a timeline. And as you possibly understood by now, it has to do with the timeline. We usually perceive time as a series of moments that goes from moment to moment to moment in a long beaded string, and it goes from the past to the future, not the opposite. And for every step we say goodbye to the past, bye-bye, and we say hello future. A little bit like in New Year's Eve, you have these postcards with a little baby, and that's the newborn year, and it says goodbye to the old man, which is the year that passed. So this idea is definitely ingrained in our thinking. And it also became ingrained in our physics. Classical physics, of course, have a starting point and an end point, and it goes usually in one direction, although it could be reversed, which is a great problem. But that's a little bit beside the point today. I will start with the division once more. This one is rather hard to understand, but let's do it anyway, because somewhere you will still get it, I think, bodily. We make a division also when it comes to numerals and orders. We make a division between cardinals and ordinals. So we say half of the numbers are cardinals, the other one is ordinals, and we prioritize something. And that is usually the cardinals that are more important, that tell the order. Whereas the ordinals, they don't do that. Whereas the cardinals don't do that. And that becomes prioritized, and we have a marginalization. We think order precedes everything. And the first thing one needs to figure out there, to tell that something is an order, you need an extra rule to say there is an order. That rule is needed, and it's often assumed that that rule exists, but it's not seen as a rule. It is a rule. It's a rule in physics. Even in classical physics, that's a rule. And it can only be obeyed if you put it into the calculation. And I think that's going to hint how causality functions in quantum mechanics. This is actually like this. According to quantum mechanics, causality is something like an arbitrarily order placed on what in classical physics is perceived to be a law. We often say the law of causality. We shouldn't say that. We need to understand the order we put on things is something we put on it. It doesn't exist outside ourselves. I was thinking, why do we have this perceived order of things? If I threw a stone on that clock that really annoys me, the clock is going to break, and we usually think that it's the stone that breaks the clock and not the opposite. Actually, in quantum mechanics, that order is not followed. That order is not there. It's an arbitrary setting from a human perspective. And I first want to look into what starts that possible perception of order. And I think it has to do with a certain culture, take the Western one. We are so accustomed from influence from each other to arrange our action thoughts in a specific order that we perceive to be causality. But it's something we constantly produce, because since it's not in the real world, it must be something we make. And it will give a general perception of ordinary causality in one culture. But we mentioned before, in the Hopi language, causality is often reversed, as we say, reversed. They could actually say that the clock hits the stone and makes the stone go into my hand. You see, it becomes very different. And these questions have never ever been questioned before quantum mechanics. That's an important thing to understand. Here actually the effect is what makes the cause. So first you have the effect, and that makes the cause. It's very odd. And somebody might say then, well, that means you can change time. Yeah, it does mean that. Retrocausality was proven first in the island of La Gomera in the Canary Islands, but by the Austrian physicist Zeeman, I think it was his name. I'm going to check it out. But he showed that you can change something that we normally perceive to be happening in the past and make a different future. So retrocausality can actually change these things and say that, yeah, it's actually this moment that caused the thing that happened before. And that means that the past everybody had is an arbitrary setting that you choose yourself, because how you arrange the things that happen to you, it's something that only you do. It has nothing to do with reality as such. And it also has to do with the Wheeler-de Wit equation. Kalle, do you remember what the Wheeler-de Wit equation says? It says that there is no time and space in reality. We have in quantum mechanics more specific things than time and space. It's not sharp enough to use the concept time and space. So they are actually gone in the Wheeler-de Wit equation. And that means that things that happen in quantum mechanics are completely time independent, as we say. And it's a little bit that cardinals are more prioritized in quantum mechanics. You can say that we have a reversal. Everything comes at the same time. So quantity is more important than order. Retrocausality is in quantum mechanics used to explain several different strange physical phenomena. One that is very hard to understand is something that was constructed of Wheeler and Feynman, the other chap who did it. Kalle just read the biography of Feynman. And it's very complicated, but the quick and dirty version is that the theory explains how a special type of wave or lack of the roof in a certain quantum equation would work so that you don't have an instance where a charged particle has to act on itself, which would in normal circumstances lead to an infinitely driving self-force. It's a little bit like, well, the widest metaphor I can do anything is like, I have a purpose, I want to do something, and because I have a purpose, reality sort of constructs itself towards my purpose. And of course this completely flies into the eyes of classical physics, but it is vaguely in the same ballpark. Remember, we talked about earlier that this idea of a world out there and a point from nowhere, it means that spatially the characteristics, the properties of reality is not out there. It's something that we constructed in order to do things. Imagine that that also goes for time. Time is not independent of human experience. And in order to do something, in mathematics it's very clear, we discussed that with Allan and Rian. And in mathematics you need to choose the order that solves the equation. Because you cannot say there is a preconceived order. From where should that order spring? And it would also be impossible to solve the equation, since that order doesn't have an origin. It doesn't have a cause. It's not coming from anywhere. And that is also the problems that happened when we went from classical physics to quantum mechanics. We all of a sudden realized the cause that's used in classical physics, it doesn't have a place in quantum mechanics. It causes problem. Yeah, it's a good word, causes problem. It's a little bit in the equations. You can never ever put a C in the meaning cause. It doesn't add anything to the explanation. It doesn't make anything clearer. Actually, what you get instead, you get this C that you cannot explain. and that's bound to create errors in the equation. And would that mean that time travel is possible? Yes. We have a lot of particles that already travel in time. One of those are the tachyons. It has a strange spelling, so I'm going to spell it out here. Tachyons. Their purpose seemed to be to travel in time and arrange things so that one could say the past fits the future and vice versa. And it's not unusual in quantum mechanics that we sort of gather what could be, and from that we sort of make a prognosis of what the past is going to be. Somebody is bound to say at this instance, that would be perfect, for all of a sudden maybe we can know what weather it was yesterday. Yes, we can actually to some detail know that. Although not everything about yesterday's weather. We cannot use today's weather to sort of calculate what happened yesterday. So the opposite in some direction is actually true as well. But when it comes to these tachyons, we can use the present position to calculate what has happened. And we always use the future position to calculate what has happened. So this really puts my previous question of the chicken and the egg into a very, very, really problematic situation. Because if we don't have causality, the chicken and the egg is an everyday question about causality. We usually use it metaphorically when something happened and we're not 100% sure what was the cause and what is the effect. Oh my God, this is really going to change that. And I would say that the majority of the population in all Western culture really thinks this is some sort of magic, because we usually think what is past cannot be changed and the future is completely open. It's not like that in reality. And oddly enough, there are some cultures where you have special tenses on verbs that means what had happened, and it's used in the term of looking into the past and think what will have happened next, and they're looking into the past, whereas the future is in their back. So you see a little bit this idea of a long bead of cause effect, or moment to moment is an arbitrary setting that we need to change every instant of our life to fit reality, so to speak. This is what quantum mechanics is trying to do, and we need to do that as well. And if you want to transform that, I was just looking through the book and here is a quote from Niels Bohr, who said that miracles are possible. This is a general miracle. It's a little bit, if you wish for something, that will actually have an effect, even depending on the things you think are determined. Why doesn't miracle happen? There have been some objections to this idea of the authors Mikael Säfström and Titti Nudin. Well, those people usually think the past is fixed. And once the past is fixed, Once the past is fixed in a sequence, temporal sequence with specific properties to each sequence and objects, energy, momentum, direction. This is what you need. You put that into the XYZ, and what does that mean? It means that what is past is past. That's done. And it has a specific order already inherently to it. In the past there is an order. And what could we call that with other terms, Kalle?
That you have an order.
Yes. Begins with a D. E.
Deconstruction? No.
Determinism.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
It's a little bit, I think in daily talk, when, like everyday speak, we usually have a vague or sometimes more specific idea of determinism. And it springs actually from the past being set in stone. Because the moment you don't think the past is set in stone, everything in a way gets wiggly-woggly, and everything all of a sudden becomes possible. This is actually something that Douglas Adams do play with. He does play with that. He should have gone a little bit more further and show that the end of the book, here's a big change, and then you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the book, and all of a sudden this motorway won't be built through the house of, I think his name was Dick. So a lot of the general idea of determinism is actually springing from general intuition that the past is set in stone. And of course this is the view of classical physics. If you don't have that in classical physics, I'd say you don't have classical physics. You actually need determinism. If you're going to count on, for instance, this house, we're standing here now, and I'm an engineer. I'm not a construction engineer, but imagine I took a different path when I had my second year in high school. I decided, well, I'm going to be a construction engineer. There's also a retrocausality. And I'm looking at the house and I want to check how much longer will it stand here. In order for me to calculate it, I need to know the age of the house. I need to know the weight of the house, and I need to measure a lot of things and what material. You see, this has all to do with objects, energy, momentum and direction, although the momentum and direction are very weak forces, but they still matter in this case. They always matter, actually. Always matter, but they're not perceivable. But the momentum and the direction will, in the end, make this house ready to either refurbish or tear down. So you see, the idea of a fixed past is crucial. And that was also the reason on television when Mikael Säfström was talking to the professor from KTH, he said, miracles are not possible. The reason he said that is that he is mentally stuck in the idea of the past being completely determined. Whereas what Niels Bohr meant, whereas our wishes or what happens in the future can absolutely change what has happened. It means that everything that happens is a potential miracle of some sort. It's miraculous in the sense it doesn't have a predetermined cause. What is the definition for a miracle? Well, in the very strict definition for miracle, as Niels Bohr is, something that doesn't happen by a cause. Nobody would call me pouring coffee into this coffee cup a miracle, because it has a cause. It has my movement, my momentum, my direction, and I put coffee in the coffee cup. Voila! People won't shout, "Oh no, that's a miracle, fantastic, let's praise the coffee cup." No, that won't happen, because we see this as a completely normal thing. And you're in for a surprise. It's not a normal thing. This is actually something to do with a complete other sets of things than any of these. Objects, energy, momentum, direction, and a decided past. The past is as open as the future. So they were right. And even if they would have asked Richard Feynman, as Kalle just read, and you proceeding to be rather...
No, I read, what is the main of the many words.
Oh yeah, sorry mate, sorry, yes.
But Feynman did, was mentioned in the book, of course.
Yes, Feynman, but anyway, Feynman he's like half classic, he's really funny bloke, it's very much appreciated.
Everett.
Yeah, but Feynman, who made this retrocausal analysis together with Wheeler, he was a rather fun bloke, but he was still in the vicinity of classical physics. He would have said directly, the authors of the book are correct. Otherwise, you back to classical physics. This is important. This is not something you can ignore. As long as you take this to be the truth, you are back in classical physics. This non-negotiable thing, non-negotiable part of quantum mechanics is that you don't have causality. It wouldn't make any sense in quantum mechanics otherwise. So it was an odd thing of this professor to say that. It doesn't have any support when you look at it to what Wheeler, Heisenberg, Bohr said. It doesn't have a support in quantum mechanics. And what was the special field of this professor from KTH? Do you remember, Kalle?
He was dismissive.
He was dismissive.
Yes.
What was his area of physics in KTH? It was quantum mechanics. It was quantum mechanics. So here you hear, it's some of the parts of quantum mechanics seems to be negotiable when you are in a TV program. Although abandoning these things would cause the quantum mechanics to run complete havoc. And actually, I would say, it makes quantum mechanics much harder to understand. Because if you look at the observer point, I'm an observer, I look into the double slit experiment, and I decide it's a wave or I decide it's a particle. You can say, I decide in this moment, 5:05, it's a particle. And all of a sudden, that is going to affect whatever was that from the beginning to become a particle in the past. All the way into the past. Back to the dinosaurs. Back to the Big Bang. But it was caused by me in that instant. And it can also be used to understand better the tennis play of Federer, Roger Federer, we mentioned that. Highly recommended if you have the chance. Listen to his it's recorded, and it was to celebrate his 90th birthday, the 4th of August last year. And what he said that Roger Federer, by his intention, created the tennis game. Would he have used retrocausality? It would be another angle to take on it. And the decisions of Roger Federer created a past that fitted with him smashing the tennis ball. And it would have changed the opponent, would have changed the structure of the tennis ball, and would have changed the tennis court, would have changed where Wimbledon is situated in reality, which part of the audience would blow a little extra wind by coughing at the right instant, so the ball would change its velocity a little bit. So all these things are changeable in quantum mechanics. They are constructed afterwards. Whereas in classical physics, the physics that that professor was thinking of, for some reason, I don't know, forgotten about his own equations. Maybe his area in quantum mechanics has nothing to do with this, which is most probably. It's into the specifics, and then he forgets the big picture in quantum mechanics. But I bet you he's still using the Wheeler-de Wit equation. Some instant he's using that. Then he would say, yes, miracles are possible. First, a miracle happens because you want it, or some other reason. And then you can construct a past that fits that thing. And then you can say it wasn't a miracle. Just like Federer can say afterwards it was a miracle. Or the audience will say it wasn't a miracle, him hitting the balls like he did. Yes, reality is actually that different. So we need to remember causality is an arbitrary setting, and by realizing that, we get a lot more freedom in our action, because we are usually stuck in the idea of a permanent past. And I say this stretches into so many areas, this retrocausality. It stretches into history, psychology, individual psychology. I do those things because I have that past. How often don't you hear that? I'm an alcoholic because my father was an alcoholic, or for my circumstances. I'm sad because I lost all that money. And like in the book of Douglas Adams, the chap was sad because they were going to construct a motor highway over his house. You see, the idea of a fixed past is actually a burden on our shoulders. It makes our possibility much more limited for no good reason. And I would even go further. Wheeler said that. Wheeler is a fantastic genius. You should read his biography.
Yes, he was influenced Everett. They were, so in the beginning, Wheeler, he was his doctoral advisor, and he encouraged Everett. And he was, but then later on when Bohr was against Everett, so Wheeler took a step back, and he was ambivalent from that moment on.
No, Wheeler, he wrote his own biography. I think you should read that, because it seems to be very interesting. And it would actually be something emotionally driven. The idea of a fixed past doesn't work with an objective reality either. That's something that Wheeler would have said. Because you are bound to put your own perspective on what is past. And there's so many reasons for not doing that. First, one can claim that your conscious experience of the past, or what you know to be the past, is just a little bit of what is the past. And maybe you have implicitly in your body more realization of the past, but it still would be just you. So this causes a lot of subjectivity in the whole thing, and subjectivity leads to repetition, and we have all this problem once again. What I could say, and this is very hard for me, this is really struggling to say something. You have definite things, I won't mention those in the Wheeler-de Wit equation, but see it as something that presents itself and it doesn't have pre-put positions of a timely order, nor a causal order, nor a special order. This is for you to do, so to speak. You doing that together, which is what is presenting itself, that is reality. Because you need to be active in this situation, because we have an observer-dependent reality. And the best example, I get this idea from Barbara Tversky, thank you once more, but think about that drawing on the walls of the cave in Lavaskor. What does the Neolithic man do? Well, he decontextualized and he recontextualized, and he could also put another timely order. This is something helping tool we human beings have developed. And by thinking about that to be predetermined somehow or stuck, that is going to be very problematic, because the openness disappears. It's like telling the Neolithic man, because Newton is going to come in the future, you can only do those decontextualization. The other was is out of bounds. It's a little bit like that. You have a presentation, you can cut the cake in the way you want to, and you actually need to do that to help your own needs. What is your intention?
Yes, so many today think about time as a clock. That's natural.
Yeah.
But I think that, okay, if somebody would ask me about time, can we really change time, go backwards? And then I think there is a good idea, good mental image, actually a wheel. Wheel. You think about wheel? Wheeler. Yes, Wheeler proved that we can go in both directions.
Yes.
And a wheel is actually perhaps a good idea to replace time, a clock, because a wheel can go in both directions. A clock cannot really go in two directions.
Yes, it's one of the reasons, for instance, in Eastern countries, instead of this linear model that I just draw here, you have something that looks like a wheel, like this. This would be the case in Hinduism. In Buddhism, they usually have a fourth one, and it looks like it is a swastika, and that can go in both directions. Although you have a sense it goes in that direction, it can go in the other direction. I won't go into the neurology here, but it is a very strong pointer that we make up the causality, and it's different in different cultures as well. But there is a huge effect from the surroundings in the culture you are, and it's very hard to notice that the causality perception is different in another culture. You really need to go down under the surface to understand that. But that's the case. We have loads of things from neurology that shows that causality is something we make up afterwards, after the fact. And it's different from person to person. It's something we discovered when we look at testimonials from crime, for instance, but also big occasions. And it is very interesting. I would not go into neurology now. I will give neurology a rest for a while now. It's been very taxing. But yeah, wheel and a bit, it's perfect. Yeah, let's use a wheel. That's how they use in Eastern countries. And it could help to get rid of this linear picture. Don't use the idea, I don't know who proposed that when I spoke about linear time. Some other time linear time doesn't exist, and he said, look at the clock, it's round. That's not a good picture. It's not a good picture. See that the whole wheel is moving, not only the digits inside the clock. And I thought it was sort of a phony remark to say the clock is round. There's so many square clocks that is around here, so I don't know. Who came up with that? Do you remember? Yes, well, I remember now. I won't mention his name. No. Well, I think that's quite enough for today. We're gonna discuss him after we turn the camera off. And I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.